Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed.
Hear me?
You are listening to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. My name is Christian Taylor, and thank you on clicking on today's episode. Now, in this one, we're going to be talking about a different kind of topic. I thought it'd be nice to take a potential break from just covering movies and albums and do like a little discussion where I share my opinion on something. It's been a little bit since I've gotten to do something like that, so the topic today I think is going to be a very interesting one. I'm really excited to discuss this with all of you. But before we get into it, I just wanted to update all you fellow listeners about what I've been up to for the last couple of weeks. So, my episodes being uploaded, it has not been very consistent recently, and the reason why is that I've just been getting really busy with life stuff. Me and my parents just went to the Springfield State Fair just last week to see the band Smashing Pumpkins, and that was a very amazing show. I'm actually thinking about covering one of their albums down the road for the show, because I thought the band left a very big impression on me. Like, these guys are really good, and I really don't listen to them. So after that concert, I'm willing to give that band another shot, but so I just did that, and then I just been working a lot at Walmart recently, and my second job, for any of you who don't know, I am a substitute teacher in my town's school district, and I'm a Walmart employee. And the new school year just started in our town. Just got a brand new school, and they hired me to start working again just the other day, as of this recording. So, things are starting to pick up a little bit, so I've just been getting, just really busy with stuff. And on top of all of that, I'm in the middle of working with my friend Catlin, trying to get everything prepped for the premiere of the mini-movie that I helped, make, where I was on the team when we filmed it. I was the boom mic operator, and the film is all set and ready to go, and Catlin, who is in charge of the production and is the director and writer of the film, she's getting everything set up for our premiere, which will be on September 28th in our hometown. And I just ran into her and her family at my Walmart job just last night, and she was telling me all these cool things that she's planning on having for the premiere, and I did not really realize just the scale of how big this premiere is going to be. And here's the thing that really shocked me is that she informed me that she's putting me in charge of the Q&A. So this is the part that really has me excited, is that we're going to be doing like this panel Q&A, like the like the kind you see at a convention or a Comic-Con. We're going to be doing this at my town's junior high auditorium room, where it can house a good amount of people, probably over 100 people or more. And we're going to have a table set up on the stage, and then she's going to have me interview all the cast and other crew members, and I'm sure people will ask me questions too about what it was like making this picture and why we decided to work on it in the first place. And the fact that she told me that she's putting me in charge of this Q&A, section, like, I had no idea. Like, that was a complete surprise, to me. So I'm going to have to work with Catlin very closely and try to figure out what I'm going to say, what kind of questions I'm going to ask the cast and crew members, and then I'm sure after a while we'll open it up for the audience to ask us some questions as well. So I have a little bit of pressure on me right now to make sure that I do this correctly. So yeah, now I have to add that to my list of things to worry about. And on top of all that, one last thing is I had a really awesome meeting with a man named Mike Shotee, and it was a very great meeting. So my friend John Brew introduced me to Mike. Now, I've known John for many years, and he's a very nice guy, and he helps me out once in a while. He tries to give me ideas of what I can do for my podcast, and he introduced me to Mike because Mike runs a technology repair shop in my hometown, and Mike knows a lot about promotion for like podcasts and YouTube channels and things like that. So John introduced me to Mike at Mike's shop, and I sat down with Mike for about an hour, and he was giving me a list of all these ideas on stuff he believes I should do to promote my podcast and how to increase my viewership. So a lot of the ideas he gave me were things like making a YouTube channel, making a Facebook page, making a new Twitter and an Instagram account, and just things of that nature. And I am going to be making a brand new logo for my show as well. That's on the list of ideas as well. And I'm also planning on making a website that'll have links to all my other platforms on there. So I spent the last week making a Instagram account and a new Twitter account. I did some tweaking to my YouTube channel, and I'm going to be uploading all my podcast recordings onto my YouTube channel as well, because I'm sure not all of you listening have Spotify. But yes, all the episodes are going on my YouTube channel as well. And I am planning on making a website at some point, but I'm going to save that for last because it's probably going to be a pretty tricky thing. I think I might have to set up another meeting with Mike, and he can help me get the whole website thing all put together. So I've been working on that the last week or two. So that's all the things that I've been doing currently. And then I just turned 25 years old 4 days ago, and I had a very great birthday. My family took me out to the Mexican restaurant in a town nearby, and it was a great time. Had me a big glass of salted margarita, so that was really good. So yeah, it was a really great birthday. And then just a couple days ago, me and my best friend and a few other friends of ours, we all went to go see the brand new Alien film, Alien Romulus, in theaters. And I'm telling you right now that I am going to be covering that film on the podcast here in a little bit, because that movie was absolutely breathtaking. And all I'm saying is, guys, if you have not seen the movie yet, if you're an Alien fan, I encourage you to go watch this. This film is absolutely terrifying, and your anxiety is going to be off the charts during that runtime. Trust me. This movie, my best friend said the words perfectly. Jonathan goes, this movie is basically a giant big budget fan project, and that's exactly what it is. This movie is perfect for us longtime fans. Alien Romulus, man, it's one of the best films of this year. So definitely go watch it. So that was great. That was one of the highlights of this year, was that movie. So yeah, so that's everything that I've been up to currently. So yeah, things have been going pretty well. I still can't believe that I'm 25 years old. That's gonna take me a while to get used to, but yeah, life's been going pretty well. And I hope to you listening, I hope your life is going very well too. And it's kind of crazy that we're already nearing the end of summertime, and fall is on the way. And for all of you listening, I'm sure if you've been following the show long enough, I'm sure I've said a few times that fall and winter are my favorite times of the year. The older I get, the more I love cold weather. I like cold weather. I don't like spring or summer very much. Because spring, I have allergies all the time, and then summer, I don't like the heat. Cold weather's awesome. So yeah, fall and winter, I cannot wait for those seasons to show up. So, yeah. But anyway, now, how about we get into today's topic? So, it's kind of funny. This idea came to me at the most random time. So, I was at my job, Walmart, just the other day. I was in my grocery aisle zoning. So, zoning is a term that we use where we tidy up the grocery aisle to make it look nice for the next day's, customers. And I was tidying up my aisle, which is the spaghetti aisle, with the jars of salsa and all that. And, that's salsa. The jars of spaghetti sauce. Sorry. Let me correct myself on that one. But I was just tidying up the aisle. And then this idea just popped into my head, it was just the most random thing. But I realized, hey, it seems to me that this seems to be a running theme with trilogies where it's like the first two movies are epic, but then the third installment shows up, it completely derails the story, or it makes the previous films pointless, or it does a very poor job of wrapping up the story. Like, I realize that happens quite a bit. And there's a lot of examples that I could name, and I have 5 third installments listed here that I'm going to discuss from some very famous franchises. And for each movie, I have 5 points that I will discuss, talking about why I think this third installment just did not work, or I just believe it didn't do a good job of wrapping up the story. Now, there's other instances I've also noticed where it's like when it comes to trilogies, the first movie's amazing, but then its second and third installments just completely derail the story, or it lacked very serious direction. And the top 2 examples for that I can think of is the Blumhouse Halloween trilogy and the Matrix trilogy, right? You had the amazing good first movie, but then 2 and 3 is just kind of like, okay, where is the story going here? Like, both the Halloween trilogy and the Matrix trilogy kind of share that kind of theme. But in this in this recording, we'll be talking about how the third installment kind of derails the story, or it gives the story a very weak ending. So I think this will be a very good little discussion to do. So let's get started. So the first movie that I'm going to discuss with all of you, this is actually a film I've been wanting to discuss for a little bit, because this comes from one of my favorite series, which is the Terminator franchise. Now, I'm sure I've said many times before that I love the first 2 Terminator films. I consider Terminator 2 to be one of the greatest, like, sequel/action movies ever made. I mean, I can't express enough. Like, I mean, it's directed by James Cameron. I mean, the guy is an action movie genius. Like, he knows how to make a good movie. And, the first Terminator is just as good, but the second one's way better. I would say the first Terminator is more of a horror movie than an action film, if I say so myself. But, now we get to Terminator 3, which is called Rise of the Machines, and it came out back in 2003. So when I was a kid, I actually liked this movie a lot, but there were stuff in it that even little me's like, okay, this is actually kind of cringy. But now when I think about it as an adult, like, this movie just had so many problems. I would even go as far as saying that Terminator 3 just kind of feels more like a parody of Terminator. Like, it doesn't take itself very seriously. Like, there are so many moments in this movie that feel like they should be in, like, an SNL sketch or skit or something. Like, I'm telling you, there's so many moments, like, it's like, okay, is this a parody Terminator film? You know, but the movie just did a horrible job of wrapping up the story. And on top of that, this film goes out of its way to make, you know, Terminators 1 and 2, or especially Terminator 2, completely pointless. So before we go any further, I guess I'll just go ahead and read you a quick little summary of the story. So now 25, John Connor lives with no record of his existence. No way he can be traced by Skynet. Out of the shadows of the future steps the TX, Skynet's most sophisticated cyborg killing machine yet. Now Connor's only hope for survival is the Terminator, his mysterious former assassin. Together they must triumph over the technology superior TX and forestall the looming threat of Judgment Day. So the movie was directed by a man named Jonathan Mostow, and it was distributed by Warner Brothers, Columbia Pictures, and Warner Brothers Pictures. And dude, it's just like, I want to meet the team that wrote this, because the first thing this film makes darn sure to go out of its way to do is that it literally makes Terminator Judgment Day completely pointless. Because remember the quote, right? The most famous quote in the first two films that Kyle Reese, right, says to Sarah Connor in the first Terminator, "There is no fate but what we make for ourselves." And that carries over into the second film, like, we choose our destiny. And in Terminator 2, John Connor and his mom, and the Terminator that was sent back through time to protect John, the three of them decide to go to the lab that's building the robots, right, of Skynet, which is the threat in this trilogy. They go and they stop Judgment Day from ever happening in the first place. They literally rewrite history and give humanity another shot. And the movie's ending is so breathtaking because we get that final dialogue from Sarah Connor saying, "For the first time in my life, there's a sense of hope for the future. And if a Terminator can learn the value of human life, maybe we can too." And then boom, the story ends. Like, there was no need for another movie. Like, that was the ending. I don't think we needed a third Terminator. But then Terminator 3 opens up, and, two more robots get sent back through time, which doesn't make any sense, because if you listen to the dialogue from Sarah Connor at the beginning of Terminator 2, which is giving some narration about what the plot of 2 is going to be, she says, and I quote, "Skynet sent 2 Terminators back through time. The first one to strike at me in the year 1984, before John was born. The second one was sent to a time when John was just a small boy. And that's it. Just 2. So again, giant plot hole here. Where did this third one come from? And when did Skynet have time, to build another, deadly, upgraded, Terminator machine? Like, I don't get it. Like, the T-1000 for Terminator 2, it's obvious, it's in my opinion, like, dude, the T-1000 is one of the greatest villains in, like, cinema history. I love the T-1000. And look, I liked the idea of, like, okay, how about we have, like, a female robot for this one? I'm like, okay, that is something different, but it's the way they wrote the female robot Terminator, right? I mean, it's the way they wrote her. Like, she literally feels like she's this, like, parody threat. Like, you can't take her that seriously, And I'll get more into that here in a minute. So, the cast for this movie, right? So, we have Christina Loken, who played the TX robot in this film. And I want to give her some praise. Like, she did a really good job. I mean, there were scenes where she was very menacing, but I'll get more into it here in a minute. Why I just think that there was just too many goofy moments in this film, right? And a couple of them centered around, her character. And obviously it's not her fault. Like, you're an actor. Like, your job is to betray what's written on the script, right? So, I mean, it's not her fault, but I'll get more into that here in a minute. And obviously, of course, up next on the cast list, we have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is reprising, playing this role for the third time, and I'm pretty sure Terminator is going to go down as his most, like, iconic role. Like, I've said in multiple recordings, I think most actors have, like, that one role that's probably their most famous one, like Harrison Ford with, like, Indiana Jones, or Keanu Reeves with John Wick. Like, those are the kind of roles that, 50 years down the road when they're all, gone, that they'll be remembered most probably for that, that role, And then up next, we have Nick Stahl, who played the older John Connor for this film. And I actually really enjoyed his portrayal of John Connor. I thought he did a really great job. I thought his performance in this was really good. And then we have Claire Danes, Earl Bone, and David Andrews. And those are and the names that I just listed off for all you are basically like the main characters of this movie, like the main actors who have like the most screen time. So I thought I would just go ahead and name off some of the cast right quick. So now we are going to be getting into my 5 points and why I think this sequel does not work. So the first point that I want to bring up, I mean, I've already kind of, talked about this point a little bit, is that the first thing I didn't like was that Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines basically makes Terminator 2 Judgment Day complete pointless, because the whole like second half of that movie was Sarah, John, and the Terminator teaming up to prevent Judgment Day from ever happening, and they succeed. And then there's a sense of hope for the future at the end of the film. And we choose our fate. Like, John isn't forced now to be the leader of the resistance that takes back Earth after Skynet takes over. Like, he can now choose a better future for himself, right? Well, unfortunately not. Terminator 3 shows up and it's like, oh, sorry, your little quote there is no fate but what we make for ourselves. Oh, sorry, you have no choice. You only postpone Judgment Day. Judgment Day is inevitable. You cannot stop it. It is set in stone. And, like, Terminator says something to that extent right to John's face in the third film. So it's just kind of like, oh, ain't that just dandy? I don't have a choice. Makes that quote from the first two films completely pointless. It's just, it makes my head hurt. It's just, I hate it when sequels do that, where they make their predecessors pointless. Like, that's just one pet peeve. Like, why would you make possibly the most important film in this trilogy pointless? Like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And on top of that, the third film kills off Sarah Connor because Linda Hamilton, the actress who plays Sarah, who's the main character in the first two movies, I guess she felt like there was nothing else they could do with Sarah's character at that point, so they just killed her off, saying that in between 2 and 3, she passed away from leukemia. But it's just like, with her gone, it just feels like this movie is really missing something, Like, Sarah is really the heart, of these films. Without her, it just doesn't work, really. With her gone, this film just didn't feel very connected, Because another point that I have on this list here is that this movie has, like, an almost all brand new cast, like, with barely any characters coming back. Like, we have Arnold, like, he's back, but really, that's about it. Like, it's almost an entirely brand new cast, basically. So again, this is another thing. This film just doesn't really feel like it's connected to the previous two. And the main problem that I had with this is that this movie feels way more like a parody film, because there are so many goofy moments where I was just like, was that really necessary? Like, okay, so I'm just going to list off for you, is that I want to list off some of these scenes. Like, some of these you won't believe me, but trust me, they're in the movie. Like, remember the first two movies on how epic it was when Arnold's Terminator shows up and steals clothes from some poor pedestrian? Like, in the first Terminator, when Arnold shows up, he murders these 3, like, punks, and steals clothes from one of them. And then in Terminator 2, Arnold shows up in front of a biker's restaurant, and he goes in and he beats up one of the bikers and takes his biker outfit, which is pretty epic. He walks out of the diner, Battle of the Bones playing. You see him in the biker outfit with the leather black coat on, grabs that shotgun from that one guy who runs the bar, puts on the sunglasses, gets on the motorbike. It's epic as hell, right? What does Terminator 3 do? Arnold shows up in front of a male, like, strip club or something, and he walks in on stage, and there's a very feminine guy stripping, and Arnold scans him and sees that his outfit that he's wearing, that it's basically the same biker outfit that Arnold wore in the last film, and he's like, he says the famous line, "I need your clothes, your boots." And the guy's like, "Wait your turn, jerk." Like, he says that in a very, like, feminine voice, and you're just kind of like, what the heck was that? Then he says, the dude raises his hand in Arnold's face, and he's like, "Talk to the hand." Arnold grabs his hand and then speaks to his hand, I need your clothes and your boots. And then, like, it is some of the cringiest things I've ever seen. Like, what is happening? Is this a Terminator film or some kind of, like, Mel Brooks parody? Like, is this real? And then Arnold walks out of the strip club in the outfit, right? And he puts on a pair of pink glasses. For like, he wears them for a few seconds, then takes them off. I'm assuming that this was supposed to be like some kind of like, oh, haha, but it just comes off extremely cringy. And then, you know, we get to the TX villain of this film, the robot that's sent back through time to kill John. She kills a woman, I believe, and steals her outfit. Now, here's the scene where, again, it's just like, what were you guys thinking with this? The woman she kills, she steals the woman's car. She's at a stoplight, and she gets pulled over by a cop. And while the cop is getting out of his car to walk over to her in the car, she looks over, right? She sees a sign of like this Playboy model, and she apparently has a gimmick where she can make her boobs bigger. Like, she looks over at the sign, then we just see her boobs get bigger. Like, again, it's just like, what was that? Like, what the heck? Again, this feels like stuff you would see in the Scary Movies franchise, where like you can't take this seriously. And then, you know, we get that scene of Terminator and the TX fighting inside the Skynet building toward the end of the movie. She grabs Arnold by the crotch, and he gives her, like, this weird look, and she throws him through into a bathroom. And it's just, like, again, what the heck, man? What is happening? It's just, oh, dude. And, like, we're just scratching the surface. Like, there's plenty of other scenes in the film where he just goes out of its way to like, there's just so many moments in this that are some of the cringiest things imaginable. As did no one think that this was, maybe we shouldn't add these in the film, right? It's just, ugh. And like I said, I'm just naming off those 3 for time's sake. But there's plenty more cringy moments in this movie. And the other problem I had with this is that the movie basically has the same story as 2, where John Connor and, Catherine Brewster, I think is how you say her name. She's played by Claire Danes, and she did a great job in this. I really enjoyed her character, Catherine. She was a very cool character. I thought her and Nick had really good chemistry together on screen. Like, she really did give off, you know, Sarah Connor vibes, which I think was the idea. But, so John, Kate, and the Terminator team up to try to prevent, you know, Judgment Day from happening. But, you know, the movie ends with them finding out that there was no way for them to stop it. Like, it was set in stone. Like, you guys can't stop this. Like, your destinies are already picked for you. And you find out in the future that John and Kate are married with children. And, you know, and it just ruins the message, right? Of the last 2 films where there is no fate but what we make for ourselves, you know? It's just, this film just goes so far out of its way to just make that message, which is a very good message, by the way. Like, you get to live your life the way you want to. Like, you choose how to live it, you know? It just goes so far out of its way to be like, oh, sorry, your fate's already picked. You have no say in the matter whatsoever. I just don't like that, you know? So, again, it just, the way it wraps the story up, it was just really sad, you know, where, you know, John's life's over. He never wanted this, but he has no choice, you know. It just wasn't, that sense of hope from the first 2 was just gone, you know. It was just sad. Like, you know, the movie ends with the nukes and the missiles going off, destroying the entire world until it's a nuclear wasteland. It's just, it's sad. So I just don't think that was a great way to end the story. Like, Terminator 2's ending, in my opinion, is the official, like, you know, canon ending of the story. And I think I speak for most of the fan base when I say that I think T2 is the proper ending. Now, the next movie that I want to talk about here is X-Men 3 Last Stand, which came out back in 2006. Now, I love the X-Men movies, and speaking of that, I'm actually planning on getting a couple of buddies of mine on the show soon, who have never been on the show, by the way. Their names are Brady and Billy, two great guys that I know, great friends of mine, and they went with me to Flashback Weekend, which is the horror convention that I've told you about before. And the three of us, during the trip up there, we talked about a lot of different movies, and we were all talking about how much all three of us absolutely loved Deadpool and Wolverine. So I'm thinking of getting them on here, and the three of us will discuss Deadpool and Wolverine, because that is, again, another fantastic film. In my opinion, it's one of the best films of 2024. So I love, the Deadpool films, the X-Men films. I absolutely love them. But when we're just thinking about, the main X-Men trilogy, which is X-Men 1, X-Men 2 United, and then X-Men 3 Last Stand, X-Men 3 gave a very disappointing and somewhat sad ending to the story. And I'll explain my reasons why I just don't think X-Men 3 wrapped up that story in a way. Well, theoretically, it's not, X-Men, Days of Future Past goes out of its way to undo the damage that X-Men 3 did. So here is a little quick little plot summary. So the discovery of a cure for mutants leads to a turning point for mutants. They may now choose to give up their powers and become fully human, or retain their uniqueness and remain isolated. War looms between the followers of Charles Xavier, who preaches tolerance, and those of Magneto, who advocates survival of the fittest. So this movie was released on May 26, 2006, and the director for this film is Brett Ratner, and he did not direct the first two X-Men films. The first two X-Men films were directed by Bryan Singer. And apparently the reason, if I remember correctly, the reason why Bryan didn't return for X-Men 3 is that he went on to direct a Superman film, which is what I believe was Superman Returns, that I don't think did very well commercially. And I think that Bryan regretted, doing that instead of coming back for X-Men 3. And he ended up directing Days of Future Past, which undoes the damage that X-Men 3 caused. I thought it was pretty funny how he came back to direct that film to put the story back to how he had it before. But yeah, X-Men 3, man, it's a very controversial, installment. So the film was distributed by 20th Century Fox Studios and 20th Century Home Entertainment. And the movie, commercially, this film was good. Its box office was $460.4 million, and also Terminator 3, was a very big success as well. It made millions upon millions of dollars at the box office. They were successful films, but the quality, in my opinion, wasn't that good. But so overall, I watched the X-Men films for the first time when I was a teenager. My best friend Jonathan was the one who introduced me to them. I watched all of them for the first time when I was around, I would say, 16, 17 years old, something like that. And I remember watching X-Men 3 for the first time, and I was really shocked. The first two really felt like they were telling, comic book, X-Men films. But then 3 starts off, and it just takes the story in a completely different direction that I don't think worked that well. I tried really hard to like this film. I really did. But the older I get, I'm just kind of yeah, this is a very weak, wrap-up to this so-called trilogy. And the first point that I want to make here is that this movie kills off way too many characters. Extremely early, too, or it just completely forgets characters that were there in the first two movies. Like, I'm not kidding you. 20 minutes into this movie, what does it do? It kills off one of the most important X-Men, which is Cyclops. Now, in the X-Men films, Cyclops was treated horribly. Like, he's literally a side character in these movies where if you read the comics or if you watch the X-Men cartoon, which was revived, it's called X-Men 97. In the comics, in the cartoon, Cyclops is the leader of the X-Men. Like, in the movies, it seems that they were trying to make Wolverine the leader, but that's not true. Like, Cyclops is the leader of the group. And in all three of the main movies, he's basically pushed to the side with, like, barely any screen time whatsoever. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. And literally within the first 15 minutes of Last Stand, he gets killed off, and we don't see him again for the rest of the movie. And then we get about 40 minutes into the movie, they kill off Charles Xavier. And I'm just like, why? Why would you do that? He's like one of the most important characters. So we lose two very crucial people, right? And then the movie ends with Wolverine having to kill another very important main X-Men, which is Jean Grey. The movie ends with Wolverine having to kill her. So by the end of the movie, over half the X-Men team are dead. And the movie ends with Wolverine, going right back to how he was at the beginning of the first film, where he was this depressed loner who just goes to bars by himself. Like, he goes back to the very bar that we see him in for the first time in the first movie. So it feels like, we're back to square one here. Like, all the growth that he had in these films was all for nothing. Like, he loses friends. He's right back to where he started. And it's just like, well, what was the point? Like, that's how we're ending this? Like, it doesn't add up. I just couldn't believe it. And then on top of all that, one of my favorite characters in the first two X-Men films was the character Rogue. I love Rogue. She's one of my favorite X-Men. And she was a great character in the first two movies. I loved her. But I was really ticked off that I was really hoping that her and Wolverine could have been in a relationship. It was hinted at in the first film, but then it was completely, just dropped, And I just don't understand that. Like, Wolverine just denies it. Like, and I'm just like, why? I don't know. That's just a little pain in my... I think that would have been a cool little story to see. But anyway. But in X-Men Last Stand, Rogue is wrote out of the film like almost an hour in. And then we don't see her again until the very end of the movie. The movie just completely forgets about her. And Rogue is treated like even worse in the next sequels. Like X-Men Days of Future Past, they completely cut her from the film. Like, there's literally a cut called the Rogue Cut, where it adds in all the scenes of her that were cut for the theater release. And apparently, they were going to bring her back for the Wolverine film in 2013, but there were some rewrites to the script, and they just completely cut her out of the film. So it's just... Rogue just keeps getting treated very badly, And I'm just like, why would you write her out halfway through Last Stand? That makes no sense at all. And on top of that, the first hour of this film, when she's around, there's a love triangle between her and her boyfriend, who's Iceman, and the other girl is Kitty Pryde, I think's how you say her name, and she was played by Ellen Page in X-Men 3. So there's a love triangle where Iceman starts having feelings for Kitty. Like, there's a scene of them ice skating together, with Rogue seeing them do this from the distance of her bedroom window or whatever. And I'm just like, dude, I think a law should be passed or something where the love triangle trope is never allowed to be used in film or TV shows ever again, because the love triangle plot is so overused, and I just don't think it works. It is a pointless, plot device that's been used a million times, and it just needs to be dropped. I'm sick of seeing that in so many projects. I don't think it's ever been a good story trope to begin with. It is so overused, and I'm sick of seeing it. So, Iceman and Kitty pretty much get together by the end of X-Men 3, and then, like I said, Rogue just disappears halfway through the film because she decides to get that cure injected into her that'll make her fully, human again. Because with Rogue's powers, she's not allowed to touch anybody with her skin, otherwise they'll die. So she has to wear gloves around her hands. And that's one of the things about her character that's tragic, is that she can't have contact with anybody. Like, she has to be completely covered. Like, you can't touch her skin at all because there's a good chance that you'll die if you do so. And, I've already touched upon this. Just things go back to how they were by the end of the film. And it's really sad. And it feels like all that growth that we had in the first two movies was completely pointless. And the ending, like I said, is pretty sad because Wolverine just goes back to being a loner. And it just feels like nothing really was gained and there was no character growth anymore. So the movie just had a really, depressing ending. And one last thing I will say, though, is that, the cast, even with some of the bad stuff that they were given to work with, the cast did a really good job with this movie. And, last thing I'll mention is the cast names. So up first, we have Hugh Jackman, who, he's a great actor. Like, I am a huge fan of Hugh Jackman. Like, he was born to play Wolverine, man. Like, he knocks it out of the park over and over again. It's just crazy to think about that. Hugh Jackman has been playing Wolverine for over 2 decades. That's pretty crazy, to think about. And he is just killing it. And if Deadpool and Wolverine is the last time he plays this character, like, for good, I would be okay with that, because we finally, after 24 years, we finally got to see him in the Wolverine costume. So, like, that's great. So, yeah, Hugh Jackman, great actor. He will always be Wolverine to me. And up next, we have Patrick Stewart, which he was born to play Charles Xavier. Like, he is amazing. Like, Patrick Stewart, great actor. His best portrayal of Charles, in my opinion, was in Logan. Like, Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart both should have gotten Oscar nominations for Logan. Like, that was their best performances of those characters was in Logan, in my opinion. And then up next, we have Famke Janssen, who played Jean Grey in this film. And then we have Ellen Page, and she plays Kitty in this movie. And then we have another legendary actor, Ian McKellen, and he's a legendary actor. And I'm pretty sure his most famous role is probably going to be Gandalf in Lord of the Rings movies. And that wouldn't surprise me. But I think his second most famous character is Magneto. Like, he plays Magneto so perfectly. Like, he is Magneto. And his portrayal of Magneto throughout all the films is legendary stuff, man. He understands his character, and he plays him perfectly every single time. Another actor on the list is James Marsden, who plays Cyclops in this film. Not for very long, sadly. Then we have Halle Berry, who plays Storm, and she was amazing in all the X-Men films as well. Like, Halle was the perfect choice to play Storm. She was great in these films. And lastly, we have Anna Paquin, who plays Rogue, and she was great in the first 2 X-Men, and she did a great job in Last Stand for the short time she was in it. But I just feel bad for the actress, how she basically got screwed over a lot in the sequels that followed. I just wish Rogue had been. I just wish the character of Rogue had been treated a lot better. But that's going to mark the end of me talking about X-Men 3: Last Stand. Now, the third film that I'm going to talk about here is Scream 3. So I can't express enough. Like, if you've been following my show for a long time, you'll know that I am a huge Scream fan. Like, I love the Scream movies. Like, just last year, I had the amazing honor of meeting Skeet Ulrich, Jamie Kennedy, and Rose McGowan, who all starred in the original first Scream film back in 1996, and I met them at the Flashback Weekend convention, which is my favorite convention of all time. And that was a great, amazing honor, and I am forever grateful that I was given that amazing opportunity. And I have covered the original Scream on my podcast with some friends. I'd highly recommend you go check out that episode. We had a great time recording that one. A lot of fun was had with that session. And I have also covered the newest Scream films, which is Screams 5 and 6, and had a lot of fun, doing those. I am planning on potentially covering Screams 2, 3, and 4 at some point. I think this Halloween I'll definitely have to make myself like a short list of scary movies to cover, because I'd like to talk about all the Scream films, because I think each one of them are very unique in their own way, and I think they deserve to be discussed and have my points heard on why I think they work, and I think that would make for a very good little Halloween series. But I think overall, so I want to make this clear, like, Scream 3 is still a good film. I think it's very watchable, but if we're thinking about the first 3 films as a solid trilogy, so it's like, if you have the mindset that nothing came out after, and that Scream 3 is really the ending, I mean, this film, like, the ending itself wasn't, necessarily bad. There just seems to be a lot of plot holes to me in Scream 3's story about the killer reveal and just some things like that. I'm just kind of like, huh? And I think a lot of the fans kind of feel the same way I do about Scream 3. So, the little summary of the plot for you is that the last installment in the Scream trilogy is set in Hollywood, where Staff 3 is being shot, with Gale Weathers and Dwight Riley on set as advisors to Jennifer Jolie. Unfortunately, a killer decides to off the cast in the order of the screenplay, and only Sidney Prescott, now in hiding until the killer tracks her down, can solve the riddle. So the movie was released on February 4th, 2000, and of course it was directed by the late great Wes Craven, great director, rest in peace. The movie was distributed by Miramax and Dimension Films, and the characters were based on by Kevin Williamson. And this movie had a good box office. It had a box office of $161.8 million. And the cast for this film is, of course, director Wes Craven, Sidney Prescott, played by Neve Campbell, Dewey, played by David Arquette, Gale Weathers, played by Courtney Cox, and then some of the other cast members for this film. We have Parker Posey, Patrick Dempsey, Scott Foley, and Heather Matarazzo. So those are the other some of the other cast members who have the most screen time in the film as well. Great cast in this movie overall, very great. Now let's get into the 5 points of just some things I felt like were kind of maybe haven't really aged well with the movie. So the motive of the killer. So the thing that really I scratched my head on till this very day is the motivation for the killer. So what I mean by that is it's just like, so we find out that this was the first film in the trilogy where it was just one Ghostface killer. Because in the first 2 films, it was 2 people, teaming up. But in this one, it was just one killer. And that's true for the rest of the franchise, where... So the main Ghostface killer for this movie was Scott Foley's character, Roman. And he is, in this whole franchise, this is the only time where there was a single Ghostface killer. And you find out that he is Sidney's brother, who Sidney's mom just straight up abandoned. So I would even go as far as saying I really do feel like that Sidney's mom is kind of a main villain in the franchise, if I do say so myself. I mean, if you really think about it, I feel like everything that Sydney goes through in all three films is basically her mom's fault because, her mom, slept around with a bunch of different men, one of them being, Billy's mom from the first film, which made his parents divorce, and that, left an impact on Billy. And then, Sydney's mom abandoned, her brother, who we don't know who the father is, and she goes off to Hollywood for a while, and then she marries Sydney's dad, and then she cheats on him multiple times. Sydney's mom was just not a good person. She was a very evil woman, in my opinion, who in my opinion is one of the main villains of the entire franchise, or at least in the first four films. Well, I would say just the first three. 4, I wouldn't say so. Yeah, if we're talking just the original trilogy, Sydney's mom is definitely a villain, in my personal opinion. Now, the first problem that I have is that where was Roman at during the first two films? The whole idea, so the plot twist that we find out at the end of 3 is that, Roman was the one who instructed Billy and Stu on what to do in the first film. So it's just kind of okay, what was he doing during the first two? Was just kind of alright, I guess I'll go and direct movies, and then I'll just wait around. Surely Sydney will find me at some point, right? It's I don't get it. So you're telling me Roman's the one who started the whole ghost face thing in the first place? What was he doing over the years while Screams 1 and 2 were happening? It's where was he at? Why didn't he, go after Sydney in the first film or second film if he knew this whole time about what her mom really did, That was one thing that just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever about Roman, is that why did he wait, all those years, and then 3, okay, now I'm going to go after her. Why? That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me whatsoever. And the idea that he was the one who taught Billy and Stu on what to do, I was just kind of I don't know. That seems very far-fetched in my opinion. That they were instructed by him, I don't get that. And the other thing about this movie that I'm just kind of what's going on here is that this film has a couple of cameos that didn't really make a whole lot of sense. I was kind of okay, what was the point of these cameos? And the first one, Carrie Fisher just randomly shows up in this for some odd reason. I don't know why. It's a scene where Gale Weathers and the actress playing her for Stab 3 have teamed up, trying to figure out who the killer is, and they're in this archive room, and they find Carrie Fisher, who's playing herself, by the way, just sitting at a desk. And apparently Carrie is playing a washed up actress who almost got the role of Princess Leia, but Carrie Fisher got the role instead. It's kind of a little joke, if you will. So yeah, Carrie just had this random cameo where she points Gale and the actress in the direction of where to find the archives they're looking for. So that one was okay, I guess. But the other one that I was just scratching my head on was the cameos of Kevin Smith and Jansen Mewes. Now, these actors are very well known. They've acted in a couple of films together. Kevin Smith plays Silent Bob, and Jansen Mewes plays Jay in the Clerk movies. And around the time that Scream 3 came out in 2000, the following year, they did a sequel called Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And there is a scene with Silent Bob and Jay. They're waiting in line to visit the studio that Gale, Sydney, and Dewey are at, trying to figure out who the killer is. Then they see Gale, and they make some smart butt comment towards her, and then she just gives them Gale gives both of them the finger, and then just keeps on walking. And that was really about it. So it's okay, I guess the Clerk films and Scream are in the same universe. I don't know if that was just some kind of like pop culture reference that I'm not understanding, but it's like, why was Silent Bob and Jay, why did they cameo in this? I don't understand that cameo whatsoever. Like, it was like one of the most random cameos I've ever seen in my life, and I don't know like what the purpose was for it. And I guess another thing about Scream 3 that kind of bugged me, it just kind of seemed like in this installment, now again, this is just my opinion, it doesn't really seem to me that Sydney grew a lot in this film. Like, in the first two films, it really felt like she grew as a person, but then 3 shows up and it's kind of like she's very, like, isolated and cut off from the outside world. Like, Ghostface kind of won in a way, and maybe that was the idea, because in this film, for the first, like, half of it, like, Sydney has really cut herself off from the outside world. She hasn't made any new friends or any love interests. She's living all alone in her house, like, out in the country, away from civilization. I'm, like, cold as turkey, cut off from the outside world. And the only person that knows where she lives is Dewey, because he's, like, literally the last person on Earth that she can trust. Like, oh, Dewey and her father, they're the only two people that Sydney can trust at this point. I mean, there is a part of me that really understands, like, I mean, we've now had 2 movies where, you know, her friends, like, she watched all of her friends die in front of her, and, like, she can't trust anybody. Like, she got betrayed by her boyfriend in the first movie, and then the second one, a friend of hers who she thought she could trust was, you know, a killer. So it's, again, she can't trust anybody. So part of me understands, like, why she'd want to live in isolation because of after everything she's went through, but she doesn't really seem like to grow as a person. At least up until the last, like, 30 minutes is when she finally grows and becomes that final girl again that we all know and love. But I guess I just hate the fact that maybe it took a long time for her to get to that point. I mean, the ending to this film was pretty good, too. I mean, the story literally could have ended, like, right then and there, where, she opens herself back up to make friendships again, and she doesn't live in isolation anymore. Like, Dewey, Gale, and Patrick Dempsey's character show up at her doorstep wanting to watch a scary movie with her. So again, it feels like she's finally happy now that she can live a normal life until, you know, 4 and 5, the next Scream sequels show up. Sydney, it's not exactly over yet, but yeah. In the main trilogy's sake, it was a good ending. I guess I just kind of wish it hadn't taken her so long to get back to that final girl that we all know and love. Now, here is point number 4 for Scream 3, and this is a very important point. So, I think I have a hot opinion here, but I have never really been a big fan of the relationship between Dewey and Gale. Now, I haven't really exactly been, like, a big Gale fan. Like, if we're talking just the main 3 films, like, the first 2 films, as far as I'm concerned, Gale was basically just a straight-up narcissist. Especially in the first Scream film. Like, she was a narcissist throughout the entire, you know, runtime. I mean, her entire character, all she cares about is herself and her book sales. And she doesn't care who dies as long as she gets the hot scoop on it, you know? Like, she doesn't care who dies or gets hurt as long as she gets famous for it afterwards, you know? Like, there's not one caring bone in her body. And Scream 2, for the I would say the first half, she was still kind of that person. But during the second half, she finally grew a backbone and started helping people for once in her life. And then Scream 3, she grew a lot as a person as well, but I think there was still a little small part of her that still cared more about her work than, you know, than like having friends or being in a relationship. Now, I just don't think Dewey and Gale were a good mix. Like, they had a very short, you know, turned relationship after Scream 1. And I guess they kind of separated after, you know, in between Screams 1 and 2, but then they get back together in 2, and then they broke up again in between 2 and 3. And that was one thing about 3 that I really enjoyed, was that they finally wrote Dewey a lot better, because in the first two films, like, Dewey lets Gale walk all over him. Like, that was another thing about Gale that I didn't like, is that she literally uses Dewey all throughout the first film to get what she wants. I mean, like, she played him like a fiddle. And I'm glad in Scream 3, like, Dewey finally caught on to her, manipulation and didn't let her use him in Scream 3. Like, he put his foot down and told her, like, I'm not going to let you use me again. And he stood up for himself, and didn't let her push him around. So that was one thing about Scream 3 I really enjoyed, was the new writing of Dewey. But I just was never a big fan of their relationship. And Scream 3's ending with Dewey proposed to Gale, it just seemed very sudden, I mean, it just kind of felt out of nowhere. Like, their relationship didn't really feel like it was rekindling that much, Like, their marriage in Scream 4 I thought was okay, but then they separate, and, in between Screams 4 and 5, they get divorced. So, I just don't think that they were ever really meant to be, It just didn't really seem like that good of a marriage, because, at the end of the day, in Scream 5, Gale chose her career over her marriage, and she doesn't really show like any signs that she regrets that decision at all. So at the end of the day, I just thought, by Scream 3, Gale and Dewey's relationship felt very stale. Like, after Screams 1 and 2 of them and the on and off relationship, just kind of felt stale. It's like, okay, how about we just move on? Like, can they just be friends? They tried it out. It didn't really work that well. But again, that was just my opinion. And another thing about this film is that part of me wishes that we had gotten to see the original plan for Scream 3. So apparently, the original story for this movie was that they were going to bring back Stu Macher from Scream 1. And it was going to focus around, Stu being in prison, but before he was captured, he organized a big group of high schoolers to make this like Ghostface cult, and they go after Sidney. It was something of that nature. You can actually find Matthew Leonard in an interview back in the early 2000s talking about like he'd actually been paid to come back and reprise the role of Stu for Scream 3. He was all set to come back, but in 1999, while they were writing the screenplay for Scream 3, the Columbine High School shooting happened. And because of that, it didn't seem very appropriate for them to release the story about a group of high schoolers, killing other students and then going after Sidney. So they rewrote the entire story and then just cut Stu out entirely, then wrote this whole new story about, Sidney's mom and then Roman being the killer. Part of me wishes that we had gotten to see that story, because I think it would have been very cool to bring Stu back, And I feel like that's evidence enough. I think there is still a chance or opportunity to bring Stu back, because we are getting a Scream 7, which is actually getting ready to film very soon, actually. And Neve Campbell is coming back to reprise her role as Sidney Prescott, and she's not going to be a side character in this one like she was in 5. She's going to be the main character in this one, which has me very excited. I just hope they do it right, because I feel like Scream 4 was really like they hit the peak of what can be done with a Sidney Prescott, lead Scream film. So I'm very curious to see what they'll do for the story in number 7. But yeah, I really wish that we could have gotten to see the original route that they were going to take the story in for Scream 3, but it's okay. Scream 3's story is still good. I probably wish we could have gotten to see the alternate version. But anyway, those are my 5 points on... I felt like Scream 3 was maybe a little bit of a disappointing conclusion for the trilogy. But again, we had Screams 4, 5, and 6 afterwards. That Screams 5 and 6, in my opinion, were the best films in the whole franchise since the original. So now we're going to be moving on to the next movie. The next movie that I want to discuss here, so this is movie number 4. So we're down to our final 2 movies. Now the next one I want to talk about here is Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, which was released in 2007. Now, I have given this film some mentions before, but the overall reason, I think, for this film not being the best version it could be just kind of boils down to, just studio interference. And we'll get into that here in a minute. So, the little plot summary for this movie is Peter Parker and MJ seem to finally be on the right track in their complicated relationship, but trouble looms for the superhero and his lover. Peter's Spider-Man suit turns black and takes control of him, not only giving Peter enhanced power, but also bringing out the dark side of his personality. Peter must overcome the suit's influence as two supervillains, Sandman and Venom, rise up to destroy him and all those he holds dear. And the summary completely leaves out Harry Osborn as well, so it's actually 3 villains in this movie. But we'll get more into that, like I said. So the movie was released on May 4th, 2007. And, of course, it was directed by Sam Raimi, who I had the honor of meeting just 3 weeks ago at the Flashback Weekend convention. Very awesome guy. The movie was distributed by Sony Pictures, Columbia Pictures, and Sony Pictures Releasing. The box office for this movie was $895 million, and the cinematography was done by Bill Pope. Now, the cast for this movie, of course, we have Tobey Maguire, who is, in my opinion, is the greatest Spider-Man, and I think he will go down as the best Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire, man, I cannot express enough. I covered Spider-Man 2 because this year marks its 20th anniversary, and I covered that film in great detail, so if you want to check out that recording, I highly recommend that you do so, because Spider-Man 2 is one of my favorite superhero films of all time. Again, going into good detail about that movie was a lot of fun to do. And up next, we have Kristen Dunst, who plays Mary Jane Watson, who I think is a great character in this trilogy. But as I said in the Spider-Man 2 recording, her character hasn't exactly aged well in this trilogy. She was kind of a narcissistic character, if you really think about it, considering the fact she cheats on her partner in all 3 films, just to give you an idea. And then we have Thomas Hayden Church, who plays Sandman in this movie. We have Bryce Dallas Howard, who plays Gwen Stacy. We have James Franco, who plays the new Goblin. And lastly, we have Topher Grace, who plays Eddie Brock, or a.k.a. Venom in this movie. So that's about the main cast for this 3rd installment in the Spider-Man trilogy. Now, the first point that I want to get into here about what I think went wrong with this movie is that, first off, I think I speak for most of the fan base when I say that the movie just had way too many villains in it. Because the reason why the first 2 films did so well was that, you had the first Spider-Man film where the main villain was the Goblin. Then Spider-Man 2, the main villain was Dr. Octavius. And then in Spider-Man 3, in the original screenplay, the main villain was going to be Sandman. And then Sam Raimi was also going to wrap up Harry's story as well. So it's going to be Sandman with Harry being like a side villain. That was the original idea. But unfortunately, Sony Pictures forced Sam Raimi to put Venom in the movie because they wanted to sell more toys. And Raimi had no intention whatsoever to have Venom be involved in any of the Spider-Man sequels, because I don't think he liked the character, and I just don't think he understood the character that well either. But unfortunately, he was overruled, and he was forced to put Venom in the film, so he had to basically rewrite the entire screenplay and add Venom into it. So you have 3 villains all in the same movie, and you can tell that there was a lot of problems with trying to spread them out and get screen time. There's just too many. Because, just Sandman alone would have been perfect. I thought, even with this forcing of Venom, I think Sam did a good job, or he did his very best in trying to balance them out, He did the best he could. I still think Spider-Man 3 is a great movie, even though I feel like he himself is very disappointed in it, because I noticed when I went to his signing table at Flashback Weekend, out of all the different pictures and posters that he could pick up for him to sign, he only had Spider-Man's 1 and 2 on his table. Like, there were no Spider-Man 3 posters, so I feel like that was a sign, like, I think even now today he's still disappointed with that film, but I wish I could have gotten to tell him, like, look, man, Spider-Man 3 is still an amazing film. Like, don't beat yourself up on that. But, yeah, that was just the first point, is that, just too many villains. And I just don't. I think that was very unfair of Sony to force him to put Venom in the film, because you should have just sat back and let Sam Raimi do the original idea that he had. Because, like, guys, the first 2 Spider-Man films made millions of dollars, and they were some of the most highly successful films of the early 2000s. Like, why couldn't you just let Sam, do that again? And, and because of the negative feedback that Spider-Man 3 got, Sam Raimi canceled Spider-Man 4, and apparently he had plans to do like a 5 and a 6, potentially, so it breaks my heart that we didn't get more sequels because of the negative feedback that Sam received with Spider-Man 3. Now, the second thing my second point about this film was the story itself with the writing of Gwen Stacy. So, I thought Bryce Dallas Howard did a good job playing Gwen Stacy, but it just seemed like she was just there for, like, fan service. Like, oh, look, guys, it's Gwen Stacy. But the problem is, they don't really give Gwen anything to do in this movie. Like, they basically force a love triangle in there a little bit, Peter having feelings for her as well. And when the Venom takes over Peter towards the second half of the film, he starts dating, Gwen. And it just, again, like, did we really need yet another love triangle in this film? It just felt very unnecessary, in my opinion. And again, Gwen, like, at, like, the hour 45-minute mark, like, Gwen Stacy just outright disappears and we don't see her again. Like, she shows up for a little bit and then she's just gone. So it kind of, like, begs the question, like, what was the point of her being there? Like, yeah, Peter saves her, during that sequence where that crane crashes into the building where she's doing her photo shoot. Like, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man was able to save his Gwen Stacy, unlike Andrew Garfield's. But anyway, it just seemed like Gwen was just there for fan service, but that's all. I just kind of wish they could have given her something to do in this film. Now, point number 3 is that, Emo Peter. Now look, Emo Maguire is, has taken over the internet by storm, and he is a meme legend. That famous scene of him dancing down the street in the black clothing has been parodied very well. Like, Into the Spider-Verse did a very good job of parodying that scene in the film, so it has made for very good laughs. But, as a kid watching that, it was cringe overload, but it was trying to signify that that Venom was enhancing the negative side of Peter and overstimulating, and he was abusing his power to get to be popular. That was the main theme of Spider-Man 3 was overindulging your power and taking the responsibility aspect out of, with great power comes great responsibility. But the section where Peter goes, full emo or Bully Maguire, if you will. Like, the meme for Emo Peter is Bully Maguire. Like, that's the name of the meme. But anyway, Emo Peter just seemed very silly. Like, we have him dancing down the street, being a cringe fest. Then we have that sequence of him dancing at the bar that MJ works at. Playing piano and dancing and then swinging on the chandelier. It's like, are we watching a dance film or is this a Spider-Man movie? I really have no idea here, So those scenes were extremely cringy, but I mean, at the very least, they made some very good parodies and laughs, down the road. And another thing about this film that didn't make any sense to me was the writing of Eddie Brock. So Eddie Brock was a pretty crappy human being before Venom got a hold of him. Like, Eddie Brock in Spider-Man 3 is this narcissistic douchebag that will use anyone he can to get what he wants. You know, like, he's not a good person at all. And it's like, it's hard to feel bad for him when Venom, when Venom takes him over, it doesn't really change much. Like, Brock was already a pretty bad person before Venom, so there wasn't really, like, much of a change here, you know? And I just don't understand why they wrote him like that. Like, wouldn't they have wanted him, like, he's not exactly a victim. Like, that's the main thing with Sam Raimi's writing of the Spider-Man villains, is that they're not necessarily villains, they're more victims. Like, Goblin and Dr. Octavius were both taken over by their creations, you know? But in Spider-Man 3, you know, Eddie Brock was already a pretty bad person by the time the Venom suit got a hold of him. So it basically enhanced stuff that was already there in the first place. So he wasn't really this sympathetic, you know, person that had a bad thing happen to him. He was already a bad person. So when the Venom suit takes him over, I don't feel that bad for him, to be honest. And when he dies at the end of the movie, like, he dies by his own hand. I mean, Peter throws a goblin grenade into the Venom goo to destroy it, and what does Brock do? He literally runs and jumps into the goo, and then he just blows up with the grenade. Like, the grenade kills him. So, I don't necessarily feel bad for him whenever that happens. And the last point that I want to bring up here is that the love story between Peter and MJ, like, this is a red pill to swallow here when it comes to the Raimi trilogy, is that Peter and MJ were just not a good mix. You know, like, it's very laughable that Peter keeps going after MJ in all three films when he has these other women in his life who would have made way better partners for him. Like, Spider-Man 3, Gwen Stacy is a queen. Like, she is a beautiful, caring human being. Like, Peter really should have dumped MJ and gone with her instead. You know, like, Gwen was a queen. And then you have Betty Brant at the newspaper company that Peter delivers his photographs of Spider-Man to the Jameson. Like, Betty has shown, like, in all three films, that she has a crush on Peter, and she's a genuine good person who looks after him in all three films. It's like, Peter, why aren't you, like, dating her? And then, you know, you have the girl who is the daughter of the guy who runs the apartment complex that Peter lives in Spider-Man's 2 and 3. And she's a very caring person. Like, Spider-Man 2, she literally bakes a cake and gives a slice of it to Peter. And, like, she cares for him in 2 and 3. And it's like, Peter, why not date her? Like, these better options keep showing up of healthy women that would have made a way better partner for Peter. You know, so it's, like, MJ has shown in all three films, she's a very narcissistic person who, she literally cheats in all three films. Like, she cheats, you know, on Harry in the first film, and then in Spider-Man 2, she's basically cheating on her fiance, and then in Spider-Man 3, she cheats on Peter with Harry, you know? And that was one thing that my best friend Jonathan opened my eyes up to, the fact that she's a cheater in all three films. Like, she can't stay faithful to any of her partners, you know? And it's just like, it's hard to feel bad for her in Spider-Man 3 when her life kind of goes down the drain. Like, her film career is basically over. Oh, her play career, I should say. Like, her life kind of goes down the drain in Spider-Man 3, and I don't necessarily feel bad for her, because in Spider-Man 1 and 2, she makes a lot of very bad decisions, and she treats Peter like crap, and she's very unfair towards him time and time again, and you just get sick and tired of her by Spider-Man 3, so yeah. The love story with MJ did not age well at all. It's one of the things about the Raimi trilogy I just don't think aged well. But, so, now, we are going to be getting into the final film for this recording, and this is going to be the last one. Now, I've already dived into this film in a lot more detail, and the film I am, of course, talking about is Alien 3. Now, I'm not going to delve too deep into this one, because I've already covered Alien 3 in much better detail, and I highly recommend you go check that episode out. It's actually one of my top 3 most viewed recordings. A lot of people enjoyed that episode, and I'm very glad that they did. It was basically just 40 minutes of me just ripping Alien 3 to absolute shreds, because I dislike this film a lot. But I'm going to try to do a better job of keeping my emotions in check this time. And I'm going to be more professional and just kind of go through some points here and why I just can't bring myself to like this film. But I know there's a lot of people, including my best friend Jonathan, he likes Alien 3, so I'm going to do a better job of being more respectable this time. So Alien 3 was released on May 22nd, 1992, and the director was David Fincher, and the movie had a budget of $50 million, and it was distributed by 20th Century Fox Studios. And the plot for this film is Ellen Ripley is the only survivor when she crash lands on Fiorna 161, a bleak wasteland inhabited by former inmates of the planet's maximum security prison. Once again, Ripley must face skepticism and the alien as it hunts down the prisoners and guards without weapons or modern technology of any kind. Ripley leads the men into battle against the terrifying creature. Now, the plot summary kind of makes it sound, like a good story, but Alien 3 does have a lot of problems. And the cast for this film, we have Sigourney Weaver, Charles Dance, Lance Henriksen, Terry Rawlings, Ralph Brown, and Brian Glover. And my best friend Jonathan was telling me I should maybe potentially watch the director's cut of Alien 3, because one of the problems I have with this film is that, Sigourney Weaver, who plays Ellen Ripley, was the only character left to really care about, because in the theater cut for Alien 3, all the prisoners that they introduce, most of them get barely any screen time, and they're just there for the xenomorph to rip to shreds or kill in the most horrific ways imaginable. And Jonathan told me apparently in the director's cut, the prisoners get more screen time to have their characters be a little more developed. But for me, that doesn't really seem to change very much, because it's like, why would I be rooting for these prisoners? Like, you find out a good majority of these prisoners are rapists and murderers, so it's like, why would I be rooting for these people to survive, considering the reasons they're in that maximum security prison in the first place? I feel like more screen time is not going to fix that problem. And these prisoners are just bad people that I just can't bring myself to care for them. And speaking of characters, it's just like this movie killing off. Here's the main problem. I think I speak for most of the fan base when I say the main problem with this movie was just the way they killed off Hicks and Newt. Now, Aliens is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love Aliens. And Alien 3 killing Hicks and Newt, off screen within the first 10 minutes in one of the most lazy ways imaginable just didn't make any sense. Like, again, this is like Terminator 3, where this movie makes the predecessor, possibly one of the most famous films in the franchise, completely pointless. And I see people bring up the argument for Alien 3 that, well, Aliens hasn't exactly been a very happy story to begin with. Like, that's the common defense mechanism that I see people use when defending Hicks and Newt being killed off. Like, it just doesn't work for me, because Aliens set up so many things with their characters that could have been explored in the third film. Like, the relationship between Hicks and Ripley we only scratched the surface of that in Aliens. Like, there was so much potential between them that Alien 3 could have done. And the alien ship, that's crashed on LV-426, they could have did something with that. And Newt could have been the next lead in this franchise. Like, Alien 3 should have ended with Ripley and Hicks, forming a relationship, but the movie ends with them sacrificing themselves to end this once and for all. And then Newt is the only survivor, and then she gives she does the famous ending of leaving a voice email, to be picked up. Like, she becomes like the next lead in this franchise. That is what should have happened. And I'm very shocked that they just decided to kill him off like that. Like, Michael Biehn, who played Hicks, like, he did not like that they killed off Hicks like that. James Cameron, who directed Aliens, like, he didn't like it either. I mean, I think the actors who played Hicks and Newt didn't like that either. Like, they had a lot of problems with that too, and rightfully so. After everything they went through in that film, just to die like that doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't like that. That sequels make the predecessor pointless. There was so much that could have been done with their characters. And me and my best friend Jonathan have been having arguments about this for years. He feels like they didn't add much to the story. I beg to differ, but anyway, they were great, amazing characters that should have been treated a lot better. And, and I've already touched upon this next point where it's just like, Hicks, Newt, and Bishop are all die, and Ripley's the only survivor. And then they introduce all these prisoners that really I don't give a damn about, just for the creature to kill, So I've already touched upon that. The prisoners were just not written that well, and I feel like even if they were, I still wouldn't care for them very much, because again, these people have raped and murdered people, so again, why would I want to root for them? And number 3 is like, this story for Alien 3 basically just kind of drops the Weyland-Yutani plot of why they were wanting the xenomorph creature in the first place. Like, I've always had this daydream of, like, Ripley and Hicks, like, walking into a laboratory or something, and then figuring out why Weyland-Yutani's been so hell-bent in the last 2 films trying to get the xenomorph organism back for them to use. Why do they want it so badly, And that could have been a very amazing plot, That would have been great. Finally finding out and wrapping up this plot of Weyland-Yutani, but in Alien 3, that whole plot kind of gets dropped in a way. Like, Weyland-Yutani sends another Bishop-type robot to the maximum security prison at the end of the film because Ripley has been impregnated with an alien queen that's going to bust out of her chest in a few hours, and the Ripley just kills herself, and that's it. And then, the robot and the Weyland-Yutani officials, they're just kind of like, oh, whatever. Like, what was the point of them showing up? Like, what a lazy way to end that whole thing. On top of all that, Ripley acts completely out of character in this one. Like, not long after they bury, Hicks and Newt, she starts having this one-night stand with one of the prisoners, who's like a murderer, by the way. And it just seemed so completely out of character. Like Ripley does not act like she does in the first 2 films. Like, again, it's like they kind of ruin her character in a way in this one. And the other thing, it just didn't seem like it was the same Ripley we had in the first 2 films. I just don't think they wrote her correctly. And it's just the effects for the xenomorph, which is the alien creature, the effects for the xenomorph in this film are extremely dated. Like, the first 2 films, like, dude, the effects for the xenomorphs hold up so well. But Alien 3, they started using, like, digital computer stuff for the xenomorph creature, and those computer effects are extremely dated by today's standards. Like, I think it says a lot when the older films' effects hold up a lot better than the newer ones. And the last thing about this film that breaks my heart is just the overall ending. Like, the main alien story ends with everybody dying, and that's the end. Like, everything that Ripley went through in the first 2 films of surviving, the Nostromo incident, losing her daughter, but then gaining a new one, getting the opportunity to maybe form a new relationship with a man. Like, she had the chance to live a new life, but then Alien 3 shows up and then just makes it all for nothing, and then she just dies all alone, and her worst fear comes through. She gets impregnated by a face hugger, and she throws herself in a pit of lava with the chest burster coming out of her, and that's how Ellen Ripley dies. Like, all of her worst fears come true. Like, that's the end of the story. It's a very depressing end. Like, the first two films felt like the first two films, yeah, they're not exactly the happiest of films at times. They're both scary, and there's a lot of death. But there's this sense of hope by the end of the first two films. But then three shows up, everybody dies, the end. Like, really? After everything we witnessed in the first two films, that's how you're going to end it? Like, are you kidding me? Like, David Fincher has completely separated himself from this film. I think that really says something when your own director wants nothing to do with it. Like, there was just a lack of direction with this story. Like, I just wish that Cameron had came back and directed this film and given the story a proper ending. And also, in one of my recordings I did, where I talked about canceled films, I talked about the canceled Neil Blomkamp Alien 5 that was going to erase Aliens 3 and 4, and it was going to pick up the story where Aliens, left off, and it was going to do all the things that I've mentioned, where it was going to bring back the alien ship, Weyland-Yutani, and it was going to wrap the story up once and for all, and it got canceled. And the fact we're never going to get to see that movie breaks my heart, but Alien Romulus kind of pieced my heart back together and showed me that, the Alien franchise is still alive and doing well. So, but I am sad we're never going to get to see Ellen Ripley's story get the epic conclusion she has really earned and she deserves, But that is going to wrap up talking about Alien 3. So, if you want to listen in better detail, I'd highly recommend you go listen to my recording where I covered the film in better detail. So, that wraps that up, and that's about the ending of covering these 5 third installments that I just felt like didn't wrap the stories up in the best positive and secure way. Now, all these films are watchable, and I'm sure many of you listening in are going to like these films. I'm just expressing my opinion. Like, I respect your opinion. If you like these films, that's great. You see, I've been in a lot of situations myself where I like things that maybe other people didn't necessarily like, This is just my opinion on these films, and if you like them, that's just fine. So, I hope that you enjoyed this recording. I just wanted to try out something different here and test the waters, try to come up with new ideas on stuff to cover. So, I hope that you enjoyed this recording, and I hope you learned something interesting from my insight about why I think these films didn't necessarily work. But thank you for listening in on this recording. I hope you have an excellent rest of your day, and remember to keep living life to the fullest and stay positive. So, my name is Christian Taylor, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.